You are a natural born artist. Within you, there is a specific signature, and that signature lives within all of us. And that signature is what we communicate throughout all of our artworks. And the way to make that signature much more clear is to continue to develop our own technique. And in today's episode, we will be working on painterly drawing and why I think it is the best kept secret. And here is the photo reference that we will be using of a cropped image of a John William Waterhouse painting. And directly beneath the artist's name is the name of the painting. If you do a very quick Google search, you will find images that are the same or if not better quality than the image that I'm using for today's drawing. So that being said, I will keep an image of this painting to the top left corner of your screen so you can follow along with me as the drawing progresses. Alright, so now we're going to begin our master drawing. So again, this is going to be a kind of painterly approach to creating a portrait drawing. So we're going to look at the corners of the page first. So as you see, I've already mapped out the top of the head and possibly the bottom of the head and the two corners, one to the left, one to the right. And notice how my arm is kind of moving. I'm kind of really far away from the drawing paper. And notice I'm not trying to, carefully trace out any kind of outlines. So everything I'm going to say today is going to be based on my opinions on drawing, and in particular, kind of a methodology to drawing and how it relates to painting. So if you look at the photo reference on the top left corner of your screen, it's not photorealistic, it's not photographic in nature, but it still looks quite realistic, okay? So I'm going to be talking about multiple things at once here. So as far as the drawing is concerned, I'm just using simple straight lines and angles, as you've seen me do plenty of times with oil paint. The only difference is we're using graphite. And oh, by the way, the materials are 11 by 14 inch Strathmore drawing paper. I will have the information typed up in the description box down below, along with affiliate links if you are interested in purchasing the same type of materials that I'm using. Just know that if you do, Amazon will pay me a small amount in return. So thank you so much in advance if you decide to do that. That being said, did I say I'm using B? Yes, I'm going to be using B lead, just B, not HB, although I think HB and B are pretty much the same. In my opinion, they handle the same, but in any case, I'm going to be using B for the entire thing, just because it's kind of a nice middle ground and I don't need to worry about changing out pencils or anything like that. All right, so now let's get back to the topic in mind. So you're looking at the photo reference of the Waterhouse, the cropped image of the John William Waterhouse painting. And it has this kind of feeling to it, although I don't like using the word feeling. It has a certain realism to it that is not photographic in nature. It's so simple to think that if something looks photographic, then it's good, or then it's somebody must have known a lot to make something look like a photograph. Well, not really. The photo reference is a reference. Photographs are things we see every single day, and it really does affect the way that we see the world, in my opinion. I think that it affects the way that we interpret the world. We think that everything photographic is just the way that things should be. And now with art, it's very difficult to talk about because it's not like physics, it's not like mathematics, which was my field of study in college. It's not anything like that. Rather, it's more about the poetry of the shapes. It's more about the poetry of the nuanced forms and edges that you're applying onto your painting or your drawing. So now in the drawing, as you see, we're starting to work the interior shapes. So I know it's kind of hard to see because I was making my lines not so heavy in the beginning. if you've never done graphite drawing, you really want to start off lighter. You want to have a lighter touch and then progressively build a darker touch. So when you're working with simple shape in this way, okay, with graphite, I chose graphite because it's a very nice way to get a specific shape, an accurate shape. And with the graphite, I think that the tendency is going to be to get kind of timid and rigid, and trying to like an engineer kind of, or an architect trying to get a perfect scaffolding. You don't necessarily have to make every mark in the absolute correct place. Notice how I'm using my little eraser there. What you want to do is you want to observe nature and interpret it. There's kind of a language to this, kind of a visual language, so to speak, when it comes to relating shapes. Notice how I'm kind of moving my hands around. I tend to do that. I tend to relate, the corner of the ear to like the bottom, the bottom of the mouth. I'm looking at angles for the jaw. And I'm keeping these shapes rather simple, loose and simple. And another thing I really like about Waterhouse, and why I'm choosing Waterhouse for a lot of these master studies, I do intend to make a master study painting of this same painting. So you will be seeing that very soon. But the reason I'm choosing Waterhouse these days is because I really don't think he tries to hide anything in his, in his style or his brushstroke or anything like that. It's rather rough. If you look at the photo references close up, you can find many very detailed photographs of the Waterhouse paintings. And he's one of my favorite of the Pre-Raphaelites, and one of my favorite of all. And again, there is something else to the way that he is depicting, or has depicted, the shapes, okay? And the reason I'm trying to talk about this is because that I'm someone that works from photo references a lot. Most of the content on my YouTube channel is working from photo references. And the reason why I want to talk about painterly drawing, as you see here, everything is kind of loose. Although the marks are kind of light, I will adjust the darkness of the marks later on in the episode. But the reason that I'm choosing to talk about this in this way is that there is kind of a negative thing that can happen if one works from photo reference too much. And I don't mean negative in terms of, it's going to make your drawing worse or your painting worse or anything like that. And let's remember, negative is a relative term. Okay, like I said earlier, everything I'm going to say is kind of in my opinion. And as I'm guiding you along this drawing, I'm also trying to tell you the kind of so-called secrets that I find whenever I walk around the museums. I think about the work of Nelson Shanks, the late Nelson Shanks. I think about the Pre-Raphaelites. I think about Sargent, Bouguereau, and all of them. And then I think about modern times, and I think about the artwork. We need to learn from the past, and we need to continue to grow. But I think that there's a certain classical sensibility to the interpretive language of seeing shape and how one works with shape. Okay, and that's the kind of interpretive language. That is the language of drawing, being able to relate. See how I related the corner of the eye to the back side of the nose. And I know I'm not really doing a good job of guiding you along the drawing as far as the drawing technique. I'm really trying to talk about a specific topic that I've had in mind for a very, very long time. With the influence of Instagram and, all kinds of forms of social media and things like that, the look of a certain artwork, trying to push that look more towards photorealistic or, abstract or something like that. It's fine, but I feel like we're losing a sense of sensibility in how we analyze and describe shape. And again, that's why I'm choosing the Waterhouse. But I'm going to talk a little more about the technique, and then I'll return to that topic later on, just so, just so I can guide you along with what's going on. So right now, simple shapes, simple straight lines and angles, and the approach is rather painterly, I would say. And by painterly, I mean that I'm working with mass. And even though you're seeing a bunch of outlines, the idea is within shape. I'm thinking about simple and basic shape, and I'm trying to keep the lines rather communicative. I'm trying to make sure that each one of these lines, see how I'm kind of boxing in the corner of the mouth? I want to make sure that each one of these simple shapes relates to the surrounding shapes, and I'm trying to keep the shapes such that I can easily move them. I want to keep them very, very malleable, very workable, and that is how I approach the block in. And the aesthetic of using straight lines and angles is something that you see in a lot of classical artwork. But again, I'm going to stay on the topic of the drawing. So as you see, I tend to erase. I tend to sit back and really trying to look at each shape in relation to another shape. Notice I move from the back side of the eye to the kind of the contour of the side of the face. Now moving downwards towards the mandible, towards the cheekbone, and then immediately worked the cheekbone to the left side, then switched back to the cheekbone to the right side. And now I'm making my way down towards the side of the nose, relating the corner of the side of the nose to the angle of the concavity of the eye socket. And then again, bouncing back and relating to the corner of the jawbone, the corner of the mandible. Looking at that angle across the jawbone. Now, you see the way I'm explaining this to you now. I almost feel like a sports announcer or something like that. But it's true, the communicative aspect, hopefully that's the right word. There's a communication between the shapes, okay? Notice I drew a line directly from the back side of the mouth towards the neck. I usually relate those to one another. And now the outside shape, the hair. So I chose not to fill in the hair. As you noticed in the beginning of the episode, you saw I didn't really shade in the hair or the background because I do intend to use this drawing for Saturday's video. I'm going to transfer it and use the classical approach to, at least that's my intention, to use the classical approach and do something kind of new with that. So I won't give away too much with that. But in any case, now I'm starting to darken the eyebrow. So we're starting to put in a little bit of value. So now we're going to talk about blocking in values. So there are many different schools of thought about this, and I tend to think about mainly two tones, light and shadow. But with this drawing, I'm going to be thinking a lot about planes, large and basic planes. So the first thing I did was lock in the eye to the right. And as I start to add value to the shapes, I then introduce another element that gives me more power over the drawing. If I try to keep too perfect of an outline, drawing might get kind of stiff. It might get kind of, just not as workable. And this is the thing with painterly drawing. You want to break out of that, the tendency that we all have to get too precious with our outlines and to get too kind of like tracing. We don't want to think about it as tracing. We want to think about it as a communicative process. And that's what is so painterly about this. And that's what's so hidden, really, I think. Notice how I'm looking at the back side of the eye. And again, relating that to the nose, really trying to emphasize the main triangle. The main triangle being, the two corners of the eyes. So the two dots for the eyes, one dot for the nose, connect the dots, you get a triangle. And so trying to get that triangle as specific as possible by relating shapes to one another is the visual dialogue. It's the visual dialogue that I'm applying to these shapes rather than trying to, perfectly trace out any of these shapes. I'm trying to get them to work in relation to one another. And now we're really going to get into, I'm going to now really start to talk about what I think is one of the best kept secrets. And it's not such a good thing that it's a best kept secret. It's not something I want to be a secret. I don't really think there should be any secrets, because the whole beautiful thing about the internet really is that we're all connected now. We can all communicate at the touch of a button. So I think that the art training, in particular the classical art training, should be the same way. And now let's just talk about what I have in mind. So this kind of way of relating shapes, bouncing back shapes to one another, creates a type of look. It creates a type of look, okay? And it's different than if you would just take a photograph and trace it. It's different in that there's a communication between shape. Even if I will get the shapes kind of wrong, not as perfect as if someone were to trace the outlines on the painting, but the very act of working in this way, okay? Listen to me carefully. The very act of working within shapes, relating shapes to one another, is what gives rise to the classical sensibility that you see in many masterful artworks. And that is why, and that is how artworks can look realistic without being photorealistic, okay? And I'm at fault here for using photo references a lot, and there's nothing wrong with using photo references, don't get me wrong. It's just that you want to apply your knowledge of working from life or working from master studies to the photo reference so that you are interpreting the photo reference rather than copying it. The better you get at relating shapes to one another, the more you train what I can't remember which teacher called it, but one of my teachers back in Studio Incominati, when I was taking classes there in Philadelphia, called it visual acuity. Something about it like IQ, like intelligence, and then visual. So it's kind of like visual intelligence. I mean, visual thinking is a word already, but visual acuity is something that you can build, okay? It's really, really something you can build. And I'm going to be giving you the tools necessary to build your visual acuity, your visual IQ. Now then, you can take that completely out of context. Like me, sometimes I personally feel really silly when I make drawing mistakes. Like you're seeing here, the nose is too long. I feel silly looking at that after the fact. But the fact is, I was relating shapes to one another. And even though the drawing is not perfectly depicting the outlines on the painting, the drawing still has power. It still has, kind of presence to it, and it has a certain look now. And it's been less than 20 minutes that I've been working on this drawing, and it already has a look. It looks like someone was interpreting shape. It looks like someone was relating all of the shapes to one another, and it has that look, as opposed to someone that was just perfectly tracing out the outlines or trying to perfectly trace out the outlines. And that's really the heart of what I'm trying to get at. And the reason I think it's such a secret, so to speak, this kind of communicative way of working with shape, is that it's just not really talked about very much. At least I find. I don't know. I could be completely wrong about that. But I find that, that kind of way of working with simple straight lines and angles and, standing back and squinting and all of that, I really think that was something that was developed in classical training. And that's really something that's really hard to find unless you go to an atelier or something like that. But in any case, I'm going to be providing you with as much of this kind of content as humanly possible. So now the painterly aspect in the drawing is really going to start to take effect when we get into values. And again, I'm only using a B pencil just because I like the feeling of having just a mid-range with the pencil, as opposed to going too dark or having to work too much to make the marks look, too dark or too light. I just like the tone that's kind of in the middle. And the eraser, it's just a regular, the kind of draftsman eraser. But in any case, the materials will be typed up for you in the description box. So looking at each one of the contours, okay, the corner of the side of the forehead, like what angle is that? Now I'm going to start to shade in a little bit for the top of the forehead, and now relate to the eye, the corner of the eye to the left, pushing that value a little bit further, and now starting to put in a little more of a dark shape for the lower eyelid. And each one of these shapes are what I would call in kind of a free form. So when you're working with masks, it's kind of like you're building something from the inside out. And I think that's a way of working that leans more towards oil painting, more towards just painting in general. See how I just threw in that first value? That is a plane, okay? Now when you're working with graphite and you're looking at, painterly graphite drawings, you really want to think about dimension and plane, and each mark that you make should in theory follow the direction of the form. So think about it like a sculpture now. So notice how I'm kind of looking at a plane for the side of the chin, and there's a little plane beneath the mouth for the orbicularis oris. And I'm going to be working in kind of light washes and progressively building up the values, because that's just the easiest way to get a nice and smooth transition with graphite. And there you go, the corner of the side of the cheekbone, and there is the side plane of the face, working with very, very thin washes. And there's the side plane of the eye socket, getting much darker. And then we're going to work that plane into the corner of the eye. Very much looking at the volume of individual shapes. So notice where I'm holding the pencil, okay? Take a good look at where I'm holding the pencil. I'm holding the pencil as far back as I can. Now, why am I doing that? The reason I'm holding the pencil very far back is because I'm not trying to be too precious with the shapes. And if you notice, if you've seen my painting videos, you'll notice that I hold the paintbrush this same kind of way. And now we're putting in a little value behind the ear, letting the marks flow kind of rapidly. And there's also an aspect to the contours. There's also an aspect to the line. So you don't want to have a super thin line. I think it's better to have a more loose line. You want the lines to be simple and straight, but you want them to also be movable, malleable. You don't want to put your foot down on something too early in the drawing, especially in a painterly type drawing. And now we're putting in a little more of a tone for the nose. I don't really understand the pink, the red on the model's cheekbones. I'll put that in the painting when I do a painting of this, but I don't really understand it. If you understand why the cheeks are more red, I don't know if that was makeup or something like that, or maybe that was the style back then. I don't really know. But if you know, please comment down below why that is. Now we're looking at the concavity of the eye socket, trying to get that shape as clear as possible. And as I mentioned in the previous video, I did change my schedule from 7 days a week to 2 days a week to really give myself more time with exactly this, with the editing and the describing of the process, making it a story of the painting or the drawing. And another thing is to really get to the comments. So please feel free to comment down below. What are you working on with your artwork today? Are you drawing along with me? Just what's going on your easel, on your drawing paper, or your canvas? I'd like to know. I really want that kind of dialogue to take place in the comments section. I want it to be another kind of learning experience to read the comments. And what I did was I put in a little highlight. It's kind of early for the highlights on the eyes, to be honest, but I don't know. I was just feeling ambitious. And I used the eraser to subtract a large shape for the highlight. And now I'm just starting to build in a little bit of a darker value. And I will have momentary pauses within the narration once in a while, just so I don't fill the entire video up with too much talk. So now that we're trying to put in a little more of the darker tones, it is important to take note of the way that I'm starting to build the values. So I'm really trying to approach it from the darkest accents first. And I'm really bouncing back between all of the shapes. So there was the dark for the iris. Notice how we're continually building the tones. Then we bounced up to the eyebrow. Then we moved down to the top plane of the eye socket. Now we moved to the corner of the side of the eye socket, put in a nice kind of chop, a darker plane for the side of the eyebrow. And this is really going to be kind of a useful tip, I think, to graphite drawing. I think it's important to work in washes. Here we have a little corner for the side of the nose. And each time I put in a little wash or a little tone, I'm also trying to follow the direction of the form. Sometimes like that, I'll map out the actual boundary of the form. One of my teachers, John DeMartin, in Studio Incominati, would always tell me to look for the boundary of the form, what he calls the base boundary, which is just the shape of the form itself. So you can see it there on the nose as I start to shade around the bulb of the nose. And then pushing another wash there to the side of the corner of the nose, and then the dark for the eyebrow. Now we're pushing a darker tone for the corner of the wing of the nostril. A little bit of a darker accent. So remember, an accent is just when one form meets another form and then blocks off a lot of the light. And you can really see that with the nostrils. Nostrils are usually a pretty good sign of an accent mark. And that's why they appear so dark, just because the way that the shape is just blocks out the light. Now we're putting in another wash for the side plane of the cheekbone, also kind of following around the direction of the maxilla, the plane where the nose rests on. A little bit of a darker plane there. And when you work with light washes of value and tone, this is really the step. This is the step to move out of the block-in stage. So the block-in stage, I would say, has been completed, which is the basic linear block-in of certain shapes. Academically, you do want to take a little more time with your block-in before you get into values like this. But I think that, again, just like the topic of the video says, this is a more painterly approach to creating the drawing. So in a painting, I would already be working on trying to get an understanding of the large planes. Even if it was an underpainting, in monochrome, I would be looking for these forms. And graphite's kind of nice because you don't really have to commit too early. as you're building up the washes, it will continue to get darker and darker, though I won't cover all of the white of the paper though. And just like in the description box down below, you really want to look for a good textured paper for graphite, especially now that we're getting into values, because the paper really is going to take a beating. And the reason I'm using a mechanical pencil as opposed to, a regular pencil, and it's just because I don't want to have to keep sharpening. To be honest, I don't like having to sharpen a regular pencil all the time. Though I'll probably use a regular pencil in the future. A little side story about this pencil. So now we switched camera angles. So now I also adjusted the, there I am checking the proportions, or not the proportions, the angles between the features. A little side story about this mechanical pencil. This year I actually got called to jury duty. I'm only going to talk about this for 10 seconds since it's off topic. But yeah, that's the pencil I had when I was in jury duty. And I was just sketching a bunch of stuff there in jury duty. And I lost it. It was gone for a couple months. And then I found it recently. So a little side story about my pencil. But anyway, let's continue to talk about the drawing and the painterliness of the drawing. Now, you can really see the hatch marks on the planes of the face. And you can really see, as I'm starting to put in a darker tone there, I'm really starting to, feel the form, the dimensionality of the form. A really good artist to look at for painterly drawing with graphite is Dan Thompson. If you do a quick Google search of Dan Thompson, he is the dean at Studio Incaminati currently in Philadelphia. His drawing is incredibly painterly and incredibly accurate. So it's kind of what I'm doing here is kind of in the same kind of mindset, same kind of thought process. So in case you want to look up other artists that are working today that are applying similar techniques, Dan Thompson. And now really what I'm starting to do is just build a little bit of a darker tone. I do think that the model had some makeup or some lipstick on. I guess those of you that know about makeup are probably laughing at me because I really don't know much about the makeup. But as you can see, the layering of the graphite's really starting to show through, in particular on the darker accents. And the expressive quality of the drawing is something to take note about. And again, it's not photorealistic. The drawing is realistic in nature. I guess it's more expressive at this point, but it is realistic, but it doesn't look like a photograph would look. And again, I'm really trying to show you how to obtain this kind of effect. And another thing about this approach or this kind of methodology, of interpreting shapes, using this kind of language of relating shapes to one another, is the signature, okay? Each one of us has our own signature, and we all have an art build within us. You sitting right there watching this video, you have an art within you already. It is already within you. The more you learn technique, the more you learn how to communicate visually, the more clear your signature will become. And it's just part of your personality that will show through, okay? And that's something that you see in a lot of classical paintings. That's why you can tell the difference between certain artists that worked in similar methods. And now then, pushing more of a dark plane on the side of the corner of the eye socket, we have a very simple plane change for the lower eyelid, and then we have a darker accent for the for where the corner of the lower eyelid. I guess it's getting dark because of the makeup. I'm not entirely sure. It could also be the photo reference again. That's why I'm not really linking the photo references, just because I'm pretty sure you can probably find a better photo reference online with a very quick Google search. And as you see, the layering of the graphite is really starting to work. I'm applying a very uniform pressure to the paper. I'm not trying to press that much harder to make a darker mark. That much is the key word, because I think it really is down to the touch with graphite. If you go too dark, too heavy, too early, the paper, you will kind of damage the paper depending on what paper you're using, and it'll look kind of glossy. That's something I've noticed with graphite. And again, I'm constantly relating angles to one another. But you can see the looseness of the drawing is really something to take note. The eye can be enlarged, it can be moved. The nose, had I known at the time the nose was too long, I could have moved it up, but I just didn't really see it at that point. But again, even though, it's not a perfect photographic rendition, you can still see kind of how all of these shapes still work with one another. And to be honest, I think it just looks cool. Okay, for lack of better terms, it just looks cool to have an expressive touch on your drawings and your paintings. And this is really the secret to painting, okay? There are a lot of really good draftsmen out there. Okay, there's a lot of really good painters, but to be able to improve on your painting, you really want to be really, really good at your drawing. But another way to improve on your drawing is how to work with mass, how to work with communicative shapes, as opposed to, just getting a perfect outline and just filling in the dots. Okay, so there's kind of a balance between the two, between painting and drawing. Okay, painting I think of as working with shape, building up masses. Okay, drawing is problem solving. It's just visual problem solving. I'm actually cleaning the eraser on the side of the paper. Oh yeah, I don't know if you caught that, but I got some paint on the paper. Look, my hand's covering it right now. See that? I got paint on it. That was from the Velasquez master study from a couple days ago. But I mean, if this is gonna be a painterly drawing, it's okay if I get paint on the drawing, right? It just kind of makes sense. But in any case, always make sure that your surroundings are clean of any kind of oil paints when you're working on a graphite drawing. But for me, I didn't really mind that I got some paint on the paper. It just builds character, I think. And now we're pushing more of the darker tone within the corner of the side of the eye socket. And again, there's a lot of repetitive stuff going on here. There's a lot of moving back and forth between shape. But this is also a faster way to, get an understanding of the shapes. And again, I do plan on using this drawing to transfer for a classical painting of this very same picture. And now we've got you into more of a close-up image. As you see that the tones are starting to build. And again, we're returning to those darker accents. Notice how the graphite is starting to build. And again, just a touch, okay? The touch within the shapes. I'm not trying to stylize the drawing or anything like that. That is, I'm not trying to impose any particular kind of look onto the drawing. This kind of look and this kind of style is already something that has been within me. Just like you have your own touch. You have your own touch, okay? You have your own style. You have your own art built within you. And the more that you train to communicate visually, that is to draw and to paint, the more clear that will be, the the more clear your signature will be. And again, see that shape? How many times have I made a mark on that shape? It's that kind of repetitive notion with graphite, and it continues to become more and more accurate as it goes. And to be honest, I think that graphite is probably a tool that I will most likely work more with when it comes to drawing, just because you can continue to work on it, as opposed to charcoal. Over time, the charcoal, even the best quality charcoal, will start to kind of fade or fall off the paper over time. Graphite, you can just continue to build. See how I got that darker shape? I did have to press darker for that, for the pupil. But they almost look like brush strokes. It's pretty amazing what we can do with graphite, to be honest. And no stumps. I did not use any stump on the paper. It's not that there's anything wrong with using stumps. It's just I forgot when I was drawing that I could have used a stump. But if you're going to use a stump is a blending tool for graphite. If you're going to use a stump, just be very careful, because it does kind of darken the values a little bit. But to be honest, I probably would have used a stump, but I just forgot. And I just remember this now while I'm editing and voicing over the video. Here we are putting in more of a kind of a brushstroke looking shape for the corner of the cheekbone, for the zygomatic bone. And again, pushing in a little bit of a darker shape there. And notice how the marks are being applied following the direction of the form. Look at the angle of the pencil. And even at this point, see how we're really, really far in the drawing. Look at where I'm holding the pencil. Take a good look at where I'm holding the pencil. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to hold the pencil from the front, like trying to be more of a drafting person. But see there, I moved closer with the pencil. So now I'm holding the pencil kind of in the middle. But again, having that kind of freedom between your shapes, this directly translates into painting. The better you get at applying your shapes with just drawing, with a pencil drawing, the better you will be in painting. And now we're starting to push these darker accents. See how much darker you can get just using a B pencil. Again, it's just B lead. And at this point, the texture of the paper really, really helps out. If this was too soft, the paper, I probably would have cut right through the paper. And the thinness of the lead in the mechanical pencil makes it such that I don't really have to worry about having a dull edge. Now, you could get a sharper point using a regular pencil. I'm not gonna lie, but the kind of average point quality to the pencil, I think, is perfectly fine. And the old joke about a painting. I heard this joke a long time ago. What do you call a drawing created with a dull pencil? I think Lucy told me this. What do you call a drawing with a dull pencil? A pointless drawing. Exactly. No, this is not a pointless drawing. The point of the lead is sharp enough. And now look at how we're starting to get darker and darker, okay? This is the point now where the values are really going to get dark and deeper. The tones are going to get much deeper. And we're going to be able to correct any kind of drawing mistakes that I could correct, that I would have seen at the time. Putting in a darker tone there. We're putting a little bit of a darker tone for the side of the cheekbone. And also take note that the camera is at an angle with respect to the paper. Later on, I will actually have I think for one of the last few minutes, I will have the camera directly in front of the paper, but it's at an angle just so you could see all of the marks. Now, I'm not really talking so much now just because a lot of the stuff that I'm saying is going to be repetitive. So I'm just going to let you watch as I apply these marks. And if you're drawing along with me, always make sure to stand back. Stand back and squint. Squinting really helps you to, eliminate any kind of minutia or any kind of detail that you don't really need. And now we're pushing a darker shape for the corner of the mouth. And I'm also adjusting the angle of the mouth as well. See that kind of looseness and freedom within the shapes. See that? Putting in a darker shape for the corner of the mouth. Now, if I were to continue to develop this drawing, to be honest, I probably would switch to a pencil that I can sharpen. But the main purpose of this drawing is to keep it really painterly, really communicative, okay? Now you really see that I'm starting to build up these more subtle planes. You see there the corner of the side of the orbicularis oris as that form turns around to the side of the zygomatic plane, the cheekbone, and then we work our way along towards the mandible, getting darker as the forms turn away from the light. A drawing such as this one really has a specific purpose and a specific translation to painting, okay? I will use this drawing to help me with a painting, which will be in Saturday's episode. But I really think that it's important for you to see this and for me to explain it to you. The notion of a painterly touch to drawing. And being able to build the drawing in this kind of loose fashion. It's simple, it's organic, but it really gets a nice result, and I think it's a much more classical, look to it. It almost feels like I could have been there with Waterhouse, with John William Waterhouse, drawing from the same model. If only I could time travel, I would do that. Now you can see that I'm really bouncing back between all the shapes everywhere. And this is the shot where the camera is front and center, though I still think there's a little distortion, I'm not sure why, to the shot. And this is going to be pretty much the last minute. And again, just observe the painterly quality to the drawing. If you could take the drawing further and further, you can even get to the point where you're filling in the individual spots of texture on the paper. You can push it that far. And it'd be interesting to push it that far, without getting too much of a photographic quality to the drawing. Just a very light touch to shade in the corner. This is going to be pretty much about the last little adjustment that I'll do for this drawing. But just notice kind of the aesthetic, the look of all of the straight lines and angles. All right, with that being said, I really do hope that today's episode helps you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork. And always remember, in a world that can be so negative, remember this, be the spark that ignites positivity amongst all of us. I really do hope that today's episode helps you out. And if you would like to support this channel even more, I now have a Patreon account. And let me talk about the Patreon announcements. If you're waiting for your announcement for my new patrons, I will now be announcing my new patrons on Saturday. For the Saturday videos, I will be announcing the new patrons. So those of you that are the new patrons, you know who you are. Thank you so much for being a new patron, and your shout out will be given on Saturday's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.